In the 21st century, we all march to a digital beat. Electronic devices shape how we work, talk, travel, and play. And at the very heart of today's technology lies a tiny but extraordinary invention.
It did for the electronic world what the printing press did for publishing.
In my lifetime, I don't know of anything that's had that much importance. You look around, it's every place. We couldn't be having this conversation without it.
Its inventor is not a household name, but to those who knew him, Robert Noyce is one of the key figures of the modern age.
Imagine a person who combines Thomas Edison with Henry Ford, a man who invents the seminal product of our time and also builds around it the most important company in the world. That's Bob Noyce.
Noyce laid the foundations of America's most innovative industry.
Silicon Valley builds on the technological contributions that Bob either did or inspired in others.
But Noyce also fostered a new kind of business culture. He rejected corporate hierarchy and empowered his employees, inspired by the can-do spirit of the American heartland. And Noyce combined his values and scientific intellect with the most charismatic personality in Silicon Valley.
He had this way of looking at you extraordinarily intently, like there was nothing else on his mind.
Robert Noyce may be the most important person most people have never heard of. "2009 is the 50th anniversary of a discovery that transformed our world. At a lab in California, Robert Noyce, a young physicist, found a way to shrink the size and cost of electronic circuits. His invention became known as the integrated circuit.
We're so accustomed to it now, it's so completely changed our reality that we don't appreciate what an enormous leap in thinking the integrated circuit was. But even its name gives you a hint of what changed. Until then, electronics was a discrete process. You built discrete devices. They were capacitors or resistors. They did one thing.
This is one of the circuit boards that were used in a DEC computer in the early 60s. You have discrete components, resistors, capacitors, and computers were built with literally hundreds of these circuit boards. The integrated circuit was able to replace in a single chip the entire electronics that was contained in this board.
Noyce's breakthrough enabled the components of an entire electronic circuit to be printed on a tiny silicon chip.
The jump from the transistor, this solid-state cylinder that does one thing, and to turn it into a process that goes from essentially physics to printing, to take a three-dimensional object and make it into a two-dimensional object that can be almost infinitely reproduced and reduced in size and given ever greater complexity. That's an enormous intellectual leap.
An entire printed circuit board can be replaced by a chip roughly every 5 to 10 years. And that's how the progress of technology has occurred. That's why today we can have in a desk a computer that would be the size of a football field in 1960.
Silicon Valley, the home of America's microelectronics industry, was built on the success of the integrated circuit. But it was also shaped by Noyce's second great legacy. He believed that companies should be open and egalitarian. Rebelling against the top-down East Coast business model, he inspired a West Coast workplace, where innovation came before convention.
Noyce wanted open communications. He wanted a cafeteria where everybody ate together, no sort of executive dining rooms. He wanted a parking lot where there were no assigned parking spaces. He wanted a culture that was defined not by hierarchy, not by your position within the company, but instead by your knowledge.
You could sit in a meeting with Bob Noyce and no one felt as though you were to be preempted by someone senior or someone junior. You could argue with people, you could challenge people, you could ask questions. You just had to know what you were talking about.
Bob's management style became a paradigm for enlightened management. The person who learned that better than anybody, interestingly, is a generation ahead, which is Steve Jobs. I think Steve Jobs' belief in always being a maverick, always being on the cutting edge, taking risk, and empowering your people to do stuff, that he got that from Noyce.
Steve Jobs of Apple and Bill Gates of Microsoft, who both grew up in the 1960s, were among the first globally known figures of the digital age. But Noyce and his colleagues, who ushered in that age, belonged to an earlier generation, one with its roots in the 19th century. Noyce was born in the Midwestern state of Iowa in 1927. He was the son of a Congregationalist preacher, and when he was 12, the family settled in the small farming town of Grinnell, founded a century earlier by members of the church.
To understand Bob Noyce and all the success he had as an adult, you have to understand what it was like to grow up in Grinnell, Iowa, where community really mattered. And Noyce came back to this again and again throughout his life.
We weren't dependent upon outside resources in small-town Iowa. If something broke, you fixed it. The small, self-sufficient community, which builds confidence in the participants in that community to do whatever they need to do.
My father liked building things. He grew up during the Depression, and so a lot of things that he wanted to have, he would have to make by himself.
His mother would often rely on him to fix things for her, and then when something finally did get thrown away, he would use it for something else.
Young Bobby's most ambitious project was to build a working glider. He enlisted his brother Gaylord and their friends to help.
All of a sudden one summer, the word got around that Bobby's going to build a glider with Gaylord. And it was a kind of a neighborhood project, but mostly it was their project. Now the glider wasn't too big. It was probably about 8 or 10 feet long. They'd climb into the thing and carry it along and then be able to jump and leap.
And on the appointed day, Noyce scrambled to the roof of a barn behind their house. He had his brother hand him the glider, and he started running. And when he got to the end of that barn roof, he didn't stop. He just kept going. And when he landed, he was just ecstatic. He was the sort of person who got to the end of a roof and kept going. That sense that with the right team behind him, he could do anything served him well for the rest of his life.
Inside these walls, freedom come, freedom come.
Noyce didn't remain a believer, but he always held on to the values of his Congregationalist upbringing. Grinnell's 19th century pioneers had left the conservative East Coast for the American frontier to set up a free-thinking, nonconformist community.
Our congregations are independent. That is to say, we are part of a denominational structure, but the denomination or the national church has no authority whatsoever over the individual congregations. So this sense of individualism, responsibility for your own decisions and your own future is very much part of the tradition, and I think that was part